6 cheerleaders from Chandler High vanished without a trace after a regional competition in 1995. 20 years later, hiker Chris Delaney and his dog Dusty discovered a buried suitcase containing their cheerleading uniforms in the Sonoran Desert. After police notification, the parents of the missing girls gathered at the site with Detective Liam Holbrook. While there, Marissa and David Green, parents of missing twins April and Amber, spotted suspicious men in the distance who fled when approached. At the site where the men had been digging, the Greens found an earring that belonged to their daughter Amber. They noticed a logo on the fleeing men's truck that resembled CPF, Caraway Performance and Fitness, owned by Vincent Caraway, the girls' former cheerleading coach. Though Caraway claimed to have sold the company to someone named Matthew Rands years ago, his involvement raised suspicions. As the first day of the renewed investigation concluded, the Greens and other parents left the desert with a fragile spark of hope that they might finally learn what happened to their daughters. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. The small diner on the outskirts of Chandler was nearly empty when Marissa and David stopped for lunch the next day. Neither had been able to sleep much, their minds racing with possibilities, with hope and fear intertwined. Detective Holbrook said he was questioning Matthew Rands this morning, David said, absently stirring his coffee. I keep checking my phone, expecting an update. Marissa nodded, her gaze drifting to their waitress, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes but a kind smile. As she approached to refill their coffee cups, something caught Marissa's attention. A small earring, a silver star with a red gem at its center. Identical to the one they had found in the desert. Identical to the ones she had given her daughters. That earring, Marissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Where did you get it? The waitress touched it self-consciously. This old thing. A customer gave it to me years ago, said it matched my eyes. She smiled at the memory. It's missing its pair, though. The man said it got lost somewhere along the way. David and Marissa exchanged a look of disbelief. The coincidence was too great to ignore. I'm sorry to ask such a personal question, David said, keeping his tone casual. But do you remember who gave it to you? Was he a local? The waitress considered the question. Not sure if he lives around here, but I've seen him come in from time to time over the years. He's a real gentleman, always leaves a good tip. She gestured toward a corkboard on the wall behind them, covered with photographs. He's on our customer wall somewhere. Thank you, Marissa managed, struggling to keep her voice steady. Your earring is lovely. With a smile and a nod, the waitress left to tend to her other tables. David and Marissa turned to examine the photo wall, searching for faces that might match the men they had seen in the desert. There were dozens of pictures, tourists posing with staff, locals celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, truckers stopping for a meal on long hauls across the southwest. Do you see anyone familiar? David whispered. Marissa scanned the photographs carefully. Not yet. There are so many. Her cell phone rang suddenly, making her jump. She pulled it from her purse, seeing Detective Holbrook's number on the screen. Hello, Detective, she answered, her heart racing. Mrs. Green, his voice sounded tense. Is your husband with you? Yes, we're having lunch at a diner outside town. Is there news? I need you both to come to the station immediately. We've had a significant development in the case. Matthew Rands was found dead in his home this morning, apparent suicide, but he left a letter. It mentions your daughters. Marissa's hand flew to her mouth. We'll be right there, she promised, ending the call. She turned to David, her face pale. Matthew Rands is dead. Suicide. He left a letter mentioning the girls. They hastily paid their bill, but before leaving, Marissa approached the waitress again. The earring. If you remember the man who gave it to you, could you please call this number? She scribbled her cell phone number on a napkin. It's important. More important than I can explain. The waitress looked confused but nodded, tucking the napkin into her apron pocket. At the police station, they found the other parents already gathered in the same conference room as the day before. Detective Holbrook stood at the head of the table, his expression grim. a sealed evidence bag containing a handwritten letter on the table before him. "Thank you all for coming so quickly," he began once the Greens were seated. "As I've informed you individually, Matthew Rans was found deceased in his home this morning. His housekeeper discovered him. The medical examiner places time of death between midnight and 2 a.m. "Was it really suicide?" Linda Thompson asked, her voice skeptical. "It appears that way," the detective answered. "Single gunshot wound to the head, the weapon still in his hand, powder residue consistent with self-infliction, no signs of forced entry or struggle." He tapped the evidence bag. "And then there's this letter, addressed simply to the families." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the bag, containing what might finally be answers after 20 years of questions. "I've made copies for each of you," Detective Holbrook continued, distributing folders to each set of parents. "Please understand that the contents are disturbing." Marissa's hands trembled as she opened the folder, David leaning close beside her. Together they began to read the photocopied confession of Matthew Rans. "To the families of April and Amber Green, Kira Thompson, Hannah Lee, Rachel Collins, and Lily Rivera, by the time you read this, I will have finally found the courage to end my life and the burden of the secret I've carried for 20 years. I am not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you deserve the truth." It began with Vincent Carraway. He selected the girls for their talent, their youth, their innocence. He called them his special team, though only Rachel knew what that truly meant until that night after the competition. The other girls witnessed something they shouldn't have, Carraway with Rachel, in a way no coach should be with a student. When they threatened to report him, everything changed. I was merely his business partner then, handling the finances for CPF while he coached. He called me that night in a panic, saying his career would be over, his life ruined. He had a plan to silence the girls just until he could convince them to stay quiet, he said. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. We drugged them in the parking lot as they waited for their rides. We took them to Gerald Laufinger's ranch outside town. He was another investor in CPF and had an underground bunker built during the Cold War. It was supposed to be temporary, but Carraway wouldn't let them go. He said they'd talk, they'd ruin everything. Days became weeks, weeks became months. I was complicit in my silence, in my continued support of the operation. Laufinger provided security, kept them hidden. The deception grew larger than any of us could control. You should know that 3 of your daughters are still alive. Rachel died of untreated pneumonia 5 years ago. Amber and Lily were killed for attempting to escape 3 years ago. The others, April, Kira, and Hannah, remain captives at Laufinger's ranch. They've been there all this time, while we pretended to help with the search, while we mourned them publicly alongside you. The recent discovery of the uniforms was my doing. I wanted the truth to come out, but lacked the courage to come forward. I buried them where I hoped they'd be found. When I learned they were discovered, I knew the end was near. The men you saw in the desert yesterday were Laufinger's security team. They've been destroying evidence, moving the girls to a new location. By the time you read this, they may already be gone. The ranch is 10 miles east of town on Route 87. Look for the sign reading Laufinger Ranch on a private road. The entrance is guarded, but the bunker is beneath the main horse barn, behind what appears to be a storage closet at the rear. I'm sorry. Those words are inadequate, but they're all I have left to offer. Matthew Rans. Marissa couldn't breathe. Her daughters, one dead, one alive. After 20 years of not knowing, the brutal truth crashed over her like a wave. David's arms circled her shoulders, his body shaking with silent sobs. Around the table, similar scenes unfolded. Susan Collins collapsed in her chair upon learning her daughter had died 5 years ago. Peter and Elena Rivera clung to each other, devastated by the confirmation of Lily's death. The Thompsons and Michael Lee sat in stunned silence, absorbing the news that their daughters were still alive. We've already dispatched a tactical team to Laufinger Ranch, Detective Holbrook informed them, his voice cutting through the grief that filled the room. The FBI has been notified, and agents are en route. We're treating this as a hostage situation and a multiple homicide investigation." "What about Carraway?" David asked, his voice hoarse. "Have you arrested him?" The detective's expression darkened. "Officers went to his residence as soon as we received this letter. He wasn't there. His neighbors say he left early this morning with luggage. We've issued an APB and alerted Border Patrol and airport security." "And Lafinger?" Marissa managed to ask.
"The tactical team will take him into custody when they secure the ranch. We're moving carefully. The safety of the surviving women is our priority."
"I want to go there," Marissa said suddenly, rising to her feet. "If April is there, I need to be nearby." The other parents murmured in agreement, all standing now, fueled by a desperate need to be close to their children after so many years of separation. Detective Holbrook hesitated, then nodded. "You can follow us to the command post we're setting up, but you'll need to stay well back from the operation itself. I can't risk civilian interference." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when the caravan of police vehicles and parents' cars pulled off Route 87 onto a dirt road about a mile from the entrance to Lafinger Ranch. A mobile command center had already been established, with FBI agents and local police coordinating their approach. Through binoculars, Marissa could see the ranch in the distance, a large main house surrounded by smaller outbuildings and horse paddocks, all enclosed by a high iron fence with security cameras mounted on the gateposts. The horse barn mentioned in Rands's letter stood about 100 yards behind the house. "They're moving into position," Detective Holbrook explained, joining the parents who waited anxiously behind the command vehicle. "We have men approaching from all sides to prevent escape. The thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures in the underground area beneath the barn, consistent with Rands's description." "How long?" David asked, his voice tight with tension. "Minutes," the detective replied. "Once everyone is in position, they'll move quickly." Those minutes stretched into what felt like hours for Marissa. She clutched David's hand, her eyes never leaving the distant ranch. Somewhere in that barn, in a bunker underground, was her daughter, a woman now, not the teenage girl who had disappeared. What would she be like after 20 years of captivity? How deeply scarred would she be? Would she even remember her parents? And Amber. Her beautiful Amber, murdered for trying to escape. Grief and rage battled within Marissa's heart. The silence was shattered by the sudden wail of sirens as police vehicles roared toward the ranch gates, no longer concerned with stealth. Through her binoculars, Marissa saw figures running from the main house toward vehicles parked nearby. The tactical team had launched their assault. What followed was chaos viewed from a distance. Officers storming the gates, others scaling the fence at various points, shouts that carried faintly across the desert air. 2 helicopters appeared overhead, their rotors drowning out other sounds as they circled the property. A series of popping noises echoed across the landscape, gunfire. "They're meeting resistance," Detective Holbrook muttered, listening intently to updates through his radio. More vehicles, ambulances this time, approached the ranch, sirens blaring. "They've located the bunker," the detective announced, his voice rising with urgency. "Teams are making entry now." The minutes that followed were the longest of Marissa's life. Longer even than those first terrible days after the girls vanished. So close now, so agonizingly close to answers, to finding April. Finally, Detective Holbrook's radio crackled with the words they'd been waiting for. "Command, this is entry team. We have 3 female survivors, secure and alive. Repeat, 3 survivors, secure and alive." A collective gasp rose from the parents. Linda Thompson collapsed to her knees, her husband holding her as they both wept. Michael Lee covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. Marissa could barely stand, leaning heavily against David. "She's alive," she whispered. "Our April is alive." "We're bringing them out now," the radio voice continued. "Medical, standing by for immediate assessment. All suspects in custody, 2 with gunshot wounds, non-fatal." "Can we go to them?" Marissa pleaded, turning to Detective Holbrook. "Please, we've waited 20 years. The detective hesitated, then nodded. "I'll arrange transport, but understand, They've been through unimaginable trauma. This reunion will be complicated for everyone. The hospital corridor was quiet apart from the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on the polished floor. Marissa, David, the Thompsons, and Michael Lee waited outside a private wing where their daughters were being examined and treated. Each family had been briefed by the medical team. The women were malnourished but not in immediate physical danger. The psychological evaluation would take longer. Detective Holbrook approached from the elevator, his face showing the strain of the day, but also relief. "Gerald Laffinger is in custody," he informed them. "He's not talking yet, but we don't need his confession. We have more than enough evidence from the ranch to put him away for life." "And Carraway?" David asked. "Still at large, but we'll find him. Every law enforcement agency in the Southwest is looking. He won't get far." The detective paused, his expression softening. "The doctors say you can see your daughters now, one family at a time. They suggested starting with the Greens." Marissa's heart leaped into her throat. After 20 years of searching, of hoping against hope, she was about to see her daughter again. The doctor who had been treating April led them to a private room at the end of the hall. "She knows you're here?" the doctor said softly. "She's anxious but eager to see you. Remember, she's not the same girl who disappeared. She's a woman who has survived unimaginable circumstances. Be patient. Follow her lead." With a gentle knock, the doctor opened the door. Marissa felt David's hand tighten around hers as they stepped into the room. April sat on the edge of the hospital bed, wearing a set of scrubs that seemed too large for her thin frame. Her hair was darker than Marissa remembered, cut short and showing flecks of premature grey. But her eyes, those were the same eyes Marissa had looked into every day of her daughter's 14 years of life before she vanished. "Mom?" April's voice was soft, hesitant, as if testing a word she hadn't used in decades. "Dad?" Something broke inside Marissa, a dam holding back 20 years of grief, fear, and longing. She moved forward slowly, not wanting to frighten her daughter with the force of her emotion. "April," she whispered. "My beautiful April." April stood, her movements cautious, studying their faces as if relearning them. Then, with a small sound that was half laugh, half sob, she stepped into their embrace. The three of them stood locked together, weeping, a family fractured for 20 years finally beginning to heal. April felt so thin in Marissa's arms, so fragile, and yet there was strength in the way she held on to them. "I never thought I'd see you again," April murmured against her mother's shoulder. "I dreamed of this so many times." When they finally separated enough to see each other's faces, April asked the question Marissa had been dreading. "Where's Amber? Why isn't she here?" David's face crumpled. "Sweetheart, we only just learned what happened. From Ranz's letter. We know about—" His voice broke. "About Amber and the escape attempt." April's eyes filled with fresh tears. She was so brave, she never stopped believing we'd get out someday. She reached for her parents' hands. "I need to tell you about her, about how strong she was all those years, how she kept us going with stories and songs, how she never let us forget who we were before." "We want to hear everything," Marissa assured her, though her heart ached at the thought of learning the details of her daughter's captivity, of Amber's final days. "Whenever you're ready to share it." They moved to a small seating area in the corner of the room, April between her parents, their hands intertwined. Outside the window, the desert sky darkened to deep blue, stars appearing one by one. The journey ahead would be long and painful. There would be trials and testimony, therapy, and slow healing. They would need to bury Amber properly, to mourn her with the ceremony she deserved. April would need to learn how to live in a world that had continued without her for 20 years. But in this moment, in this hospital room with her daughter's hand in hers, Marissa felt something she had almost forgotten. Peace. Not happiness, that would take time, but the quiet peace of finally knowing of questions answered and searching ended. "Tell me," April said softly, looking between her parents. Tell me about your lives. Tell me everything I missed." And so they began to talk, building a bridge across 20 years of separation, word by careful word, story by story, reconnecting the broken strands of their family narrative. Outside the room, Detective Holbrook stood speaking quietly with FBI agents, coordinating the manhunt for Vincent Carraway. The waitress from the diner had identified him from photographs as the man who had given her the earring years ago. His company vehicles were being traced, his financial records examined. They would find him. Justice, long delayed, would finally come. The other families had begun their own reunions down the hall, their voices a symphony of grief and joy, tears and laughter as they too began the journey toward healing. Above them all, the desert stars glittered in the vast Arizona sky, the same stars that had watched over a group of young cheerleaders 20 years earlier, stars that had witnessed both the darkest acts of human cruelty and now the enduring power of love and hope that had never quite died, even in the darkest times. For April, Kira, and Hannah, a new chapter was beginning. For Rachel, Amber, and Lily, there would finally be justice and remembrance. And for Marissa, holding her daughter's hand as if she might never let go again, there was the simple, profound miracle of having April back, changed, wounded, but alive. After 20 years of emptiness, it was enough. It was everything. The memorial garden bloomed with desert wildflowers, their vibrant colors standing in defiance of the somber occasion. 3 granite markers bore the names of Amber Green, Rachel Collins, and Lily Rivera, girls whose remains had finally been recovered from a remote corner of Laughing Ranch and returned to their families for proper burial. Marissa stood between David and April, their hands linked as they placed fresh flowers on Amber's marker. April had grown stronger over the past 3 months. Physically, her frame less gaunt. Emotionally, her quiet determination emerging more each day. The trauma would never fully disappear, but with intensive therapy and the unwavering support of her parents, she was learning to build a new life. She would have liked this place, April said softly, touching the smooth stone that bore her twin's name. She always loved flowers. Across the garden, Susan Collins knelt by Rachel's marker, while Peter and Eleanor Rivera stood in silent vigil at Lily's. United in grief, these families had formed a bond that transcended ordinary friendship. Detective Holbrook approached from the garden entrance, his expression solemn but satisfied. He waited respectfully until they acknowledged him before speaking. "I wanted to tell you in person," he said. "Vincent Carraway was apprehended this morning trying to cross into Mexico near Nogales. A Border Patrol agent recognized him from the alerts." A collective exhale seemed to pass through the garden. The last fugitive, captured at last. "He'll face trial along with Laufinger?" David asked. The detective nodded. "Multiple counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of murder, human trafficking, criminal conspiracy, the list goes on. The district attorney is pursuing maximum sentences for both men. With the evidence we've recovered, and the testimony from April, Kira, and Hannah, there's no chance either will ever walk free again." "What about Matthew Rands?" Marissa asked. Though dead by his own hand, the man's role in their daughter's disappearance deserved recognition. "His estate is being liquidated," Holbrook replied. "The court has ordered all proceeds to go into a trust for the survivors' ongoing care and rehabilitation." April squeezed her mother's hand. "It's really over now, isn't it?" "The criminal case, yes," the detective confirmed. "The healing journey continues, but you won't face it alone." Later that afternoon, the 3 survivors met at the rehabilitation center where they attended weekly group therapy sessions. Though they lived separately now, each reunited with their families, their shared experience had forged an unbreakable connection. Kira had begun taking online college courses, determined to pursue the education that had been stolen from her. Hannah had started writing her memoir, finding purpose in documenting their story to help other trauma survivors. And April had discovered a talent for desert botany, spending hours in a community garden where the open sky and freely growing plants helped heal the wounds of 2 decades in underground confinement. They sat together in the center's courtyard, 3 women in their mid-30s who were simultaneously relearning how to be the girls they once were and discovering the women they might become. "I saw the news about Carraway," Hannah said, her voice steadier than it had been in earlier months. "They're saying he'll never get parole."
Kira nodded. "My father attended Laufinger's pre-trial hearing. The judge denied bail. He'll remain in custody until sentencing."
"My mum told me they found the drugs they used on us," April added, "hidden in that old CPF office building. It's all evidence now." They fell silent, each processing in her own way the finality of these developments. Justice, so long delayed, was finally being served. The men who had stolen their youth would pay for their crimes. The secret bunker at Laufinger Ranch had been sealed off, the property seized by the government. The cheerleading uniforms that Chris Delaney's dog had discovered were now key evidence in the prosecution's case. Life would never return to what it might have been if they hadn't been taken that night after the competition. That alternate timeline, college, careers, perhaps marriages and children, existed only in the realm of what-ifs. But they were creating new futures now, day by day, choice by choice. In Chandler, the community had rallied around the survivors and the families of those lost. The high school had established scholarships in the names of Amber, Rachel, and Lily. News outlets that had long ago relegated the case to occasional anniversary of disappearance stories now followed the survivors' recovery with respectful distance, honoring their privacy while acknowledging the significance of their return. The waitress from the diner had surrendered the earring, which was reunited with its match and returned to the Green family. Marissa kept the pair in a small glass display case in their living room, no longer just missing pieces from a tragic puzzle, but symbols of the persistence that had ultimately led to truth and reunion. Chris Delaney and his dog, Dusty, had become unexpected heroes. The modest hiker eschewed publicity, but had formed a friendship with the families, joining them occasionally for Sunday dinners. Dusty, now sporting a special medallion on his collar recognizing his role in solving the case, always received extra treats from April, who credited the dog with initiating her rescue. As autumn settled over Arizona, bringing cooler temperatures and softening the harsh desert landscape, the families affected by the 20-year mystery began to look forward rather than back. There would always be difficult days, triggers that brought painful memories surging to the surface, but there was also laughter returning to homes long shadowed by grief, new traditions being established, and moments of ordinary joy that had once seemed impossible. For April Green, sitting on the porch swing at her parents' home one evening watching the sunset, the simple freedom to feel the breeze on her face and to come and go as she pleased remained a daily miracle. She had missed 2 decades of technological advancement, cultural shifts, and world events, but she was catching up one day at a time, her natural curiosity slowly reawakening. "Room for one more?" Marissa asked, stepping onto the porch with 2 mugs of tea. April smiled, moving over to make space. "Always." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky transform through shades of orange and purple. The investigation was complete, the legal proceedings underway, the media attention fading. What remained was the profound, ordinary business of being a family, changed irrevocably by what they had endured, but intact in the ways that mattered most. "I was thinking about Amber today," April said after a while. "Not about how she died, but about how she lived. How she used to make up those ridiculous cheers just to make me laugh."
Marissa smiled through tears. "She was always the silly one."
"I want to remember her that way," April decided. "Not as a victim, but as my sister who never lost her spirit, even in the darkest times." In the quiet neighborhood street, a dog barked, a car door slammed, a child called to a friend. The everyday symphony of normal life continued around them, a world that had seemed so far beyond reach for 20 years, now simply the backdrop to their healing. The mysteries had been solved, the perpetrators would face justice, the lost had been mourned, and the survivors welcomed home. The story that had begun with the disappearance of 6 young cheerleaders had found not a happy ending, for too much had been lost for that, but a resolution that honored both the tragedy of what had happened and the resilience of those who had survived it. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for: truth, justice, and the chance to rebuild. For April Green and her family, for the Thompsons and the Lees, and even for the families who would never welcome their daughters home again, the long chapter of not knowing had finally closed. What remained was the future, uncertain as all futures are, but no longer defined by a 20-year-old mystery that had once consumed them all. And that was enough. If you found this story touching, please remember to like and subscribe for more emotional stories of loss and discovery. This is based on events that happen more often than we realize, so share it with someone who needs to hear this.